9 men walked into the Ozark forest in the autumn of 1893 and did not walk out. That fact alone would be disturbing. Men died in logging camps regularly, from falling timber, from infected wounds, from the kind of accidents that come when large men work with large tools in terrain that does not forgive error. If 9 men had died in that forest, it would have been a tragedy. It would have been documented and mourned and eventually forgotten the way working men's deaths were forgotten in that era when the timber industry measured human cost the way it measured board feet, in quantity, not in weight. But they did not die in the forest. Or if they did, no evidence of it was ever found. What was found, and this is the part that the Stone County, Missouri records from October and November of 1893 document in enough detail to keep investigators and researchers returning to the case for the better part of a century, was the camp intact, undisturbed, every tool in its place, every bedroll laid out, food still in the cooking pot, the fire reduced to cold ash, which the first man to arrive estimated had been out for between 2 and 4 days. 9 men vanished from a camp that showed no sign of departure, no sign of struggle, and no sign that anything unusual had happened at all. Before we go any further, drop your location in the comments. Tell me where you're watching this from and what time it is there, because by the time this is over, you are going to want to know that you are somewhere well away from the Ozark Hill country of southern Missouri. The Missouri Ozarks in 1893 were not wilderness in the way that word is sometimes used loosely to mean remote or rural. They were a specific kind of wilderness, old wilderness, heavy wilderness, the kind that has its own logic and does not bend to accommodate the logic of the men who enter it. The terrain is limestone karst country, bluffs that rise 70 and 80 feet from the creek bottoms, caves that run for miles beneath the ridgelines, forests so dense in the hollows that full summer sunlight never reaches the ground. Stone County had been organized as a county for less than 30 years in 1893. The county seat of Galena had a population of fewer than 400 people. The nearest telegraph station was in Reed Spring, 14 miles north, over roads that became impassable mud for weeks at a time when the rains came in. The law, such as it was, consisted of a single county sheriff, a man named Hardin Voss, and 2 deputies whose jurisdiction covered an area of roughly 500 square miles of that hill country. If something went wrong in the deep timber, the response time was measured not in hours but in days, and only if someone made it out to report it. October came early and cold that year. According to a front-page account in the Springfield Leader dated October 4th, 1893, the first frost had arrived in the Ozark Hill country a full 3 weeks before its usual date, and the creeks had dropped to their lowest levels in memory. The timber company operating in Stone County, Halloran Brothers Timber, incorporated in Springfield in 1889, had pushed their fall cutting season hard to make up for a slow summer. The goal was to get as much timber felled and hauled to the mill road as possible before the ground froze and made sled transport impractical. The crew foreman was a man named August Riley, 44 years old, a broad, thick-limbed build that came from 21 years of working timber in Missouri, Arkansas, and before that, the forests of Upper Michigan. His hands were calloused to the texture of boot leather, the knuckles enlarged from years of cold and work, his right index finger set at a slight angle from a break he had taken off a widowmaker blow in 1881 and never had properly set by a doctor. His eyes were the brown-green of creek water in autumn, when the tannins from the fallen leaves stained the shallows. He had worked for Halloran Brothers for 6 years. He was known among the men he supervised as a fair foreman, not kind exactly, but scrupulously fair, and in a logging camp, that distinction mattered more than kindness. The 8 men under Riley's supervision on the fall 1893 cut were experienced hands. Not one of them was under 30 years old. Several had worked the Ozark timber country for more than a decade. These were not inexperienced men who wandered off a trail they didn't know. These were men who understood the forest the way tradesmen understand their tools, functionally, practically, without sentiment, but with genuine comprehension. For the first 2 weeks of October, everything proceeded normally. Halloran Brothers received 2 full delivery reports from Rayleigh, standard paperwork, noting board footage felled and hauled, crew health, and weather conditions. The second report, dated October 12th, noted that the crew had moved their base camp approximately a mile and a half deeper into the ridge country to follow the timber. Riley noted the creek access was good, and the weather, though cold, was holding. That was the last communication anyone received from August Riley or any of the 8 men in his crew. The first person to notice something was wrong was a supply driver named Cletus Dunbar, who ran provisions to logging camps on a weekly circuit for a general merchant in Galena. Dunbar knew the Halloran crew. He had resupplied them 4 times over the course of the season. He knew Riley by name and knew approximately where the camp would be positioned. based on the last delivery. On October 18, 1893, 6 days after Riley's final report, Dunbar drove his wagon to the edge of the timber access, rode and walked the remaining half-mile to the camp on foot, as was his habit when the road came too rough for the wagon. He found the camp without difficulty. It was exactly where it should have been, positioned on a flat shelf of ground above a small creek, sheltered on the north side by a limestone bluff. 8 sleeping shelters, canvas lean-tos reinforced with cut poles, were standing. The campfire ring held ash and partially burned wood. The cooking pot was suspended over the fire ring on its iron hook. Food, a stew of some kind, Dunbar said, was in the pot, dried and stiff but recognizable. 9 bedrolls were laid out inside the lean-tos. All of them had been slept in. All of them were still in place. The tools, axes, draw knives, peaveys, a 2-man crosscut saw were racked on the equipment frame at the edge of camp. Every one of them. Accounted for. The men were not there. Dunbar waited 2 hours, he called out. He walked like a half-mile perimeter around the camp in each direction, calling names. Nothing answered him. The forest was quiet in a way he later described to Sheriff Voss as unusual. Not the silence of an empty place, he said, but the silence of a place that was listening. He drove back to Galena and reported it that same evening. In his statement to Sheriff Voss, recorded on October 18th and preserved in the Stone County court records held at the Missouri State Archives in Jefferson City, Dunbar said, "There was no reason for them to be gone. There was every reason for them to be there. The camp was ready. The fire wanted only a match. The men wanted only to be standing in it. Nobody had a ready explanation for it, but nobody panicked immediately either. Logging crews sometimes pushed deep into the timber and camped rough for several days before returning to their main site. Perhaps they had found a particularly rich stand and pushed their cutting radius further than usual. Perhaps Rayleigh had made a decision that simply hadn't been communicated back. That was what people told themselves. For a few days, that was enough. Sheriff Hardin Voss rode out to the camp on October 21st with his senior deputy, a man named Caleb Marsh, who had 20 years of experience as a lawman in Missouri and Arkansas and had worked 3 missing persons cases in his career, all of them resolved within a week. Marsh was 61 years old, a former Confederate Army scout, a man who had spent the better part of his adult life in rough country and who, by his own account given in a deposition filed with the Stone County Court in December 1893, did not believe in things he couldn't put his hands on. They examined the camp for 2 hours. Marsh later said in that deposition that he found nothing that suggested violence. No blood, no signs of a struggle, no broken equipment, no indication that the camp had been approached by a large number of people from outside. The ground was hard from the frost and held few clear tracks, but what tracks were visible around the camp perimeter were consistent with the crew's own boot patterns going about their ordinary work. There was one thing Marsh noted in his deposition that he did not note in the official missing persons report he and Voss filed with the county court on October 24th. In the margin of his personal field journal, a small leather-bound book his granddaughter donated to the Missouri State Archives in 1948 along with a collection of his other papers, Marsh wrote the following, in handwriting that was smaller and more compressed than his normal entries. The trees at the north edge of camp against the bluff wall have been marked, not by axes, not by knives. The marks are regular, a pattern repeated at intervals along the bluff face and into the timber. The pattern is not one I know. Voss did not see them or said he did not. I did not include this in the official record because I cannot explain it, and what cannot be explained cannot be made useful in a court document. He described the marks as vertical, as being roughly at shoulder height on the trees and limestone face, and as continuing in a line that led south, deeper into the ridge country, for as far as he walked before he turned back. He did not say why he turned back, he said only, "I turned back." The fog had come down into the hollow, the creek made no sound, the bluff had nothing to give him. But here is what no one knew at the time, what only became clear after a researcher named Helen Pruitt, working on a regional history project at what is now Missouri State University, connected the documents in 1961. The Halloran Brothers crew was not the first group of men to vanish from that particular section of Stone County Ridge Country. It was the third. In November of 1879, a party of 4 surveyors contracted by the Missouri Pacific Railroad to assess a potential rail route through the southern Ozarks had entered the same ridge corridor and failed to return. The company filed a missing persons report with the Stone County Sheriff's Office on November 30th, 1879. The report is still in the Missouri State Archives. A search party found their equipment, 2 theodolites, a chain measure, their field packs, resting against the base of a limestone bluff. The men were not there. The search was called off after 4 days due to weather. The railroad abandoned the southern Ozark route and never publicly explained why. In the spring of 1886, a trapper named Josiah Wend, who worked a line through the same ridge country, told a merchant in Galena that he had found a camp, not his own, in the deep timber near the bluffs. He described it as fully appointed and apparently recently abandoned, tools, provisions, a fire gone cold. He did not know whose camp it was. He reported it to the Stone County Sheriff's Office in April of 1886. The record of that report, a single handwritten page, is filed in a folder at the Missouri State Archives under the heading Miscellaneous Complaints, 1886. It was never formally investigated. And then August Riley and his 8 men, 3 incidents, same terrain, same pattern, camps or equipment found without men, no bodies, no blood, no explanation that survived scrutiny. When Helen Pruitt connected these 3 cases in her 1961 research notes, notes that were never published but that were donated to the Springfield Greene County Library's local history collection by her estate in 1989, she wrote in her summary, "The consistency of the pattern across 3 separate incidents spanning 14 years is difficult to attribute to coincidence. The corridor of ridge country in question is less than 4 square miles in total area. The limestone bluff formations in that section are extensive and have never been fully mapped. In my assessment, the relevant question is not what happened to these men. It is what has been happening in that particular place, and for how long it has been happening." She had no answer. She knew she did not have one. She wrote it down anyway. The formal investigation into the Halloran brothers' crew disappeared lasted 11 days. Voss and Marsh conducted 3 additional searches. A volunteer party of 14 men from Galena joined the second search. They found nothing, not a scrap of clothing, not a tool moved from where Dunbar had found it, not a single body or any indication of where 9 grown men might have gone. On November 2, 1893, Voss filed his final report with the Stone County Circuit Court. 9 men were listed as missing, presumed dead by misadventure in the Ozark timber country. The cause was listed pro forma as exposure and forest accident. The notation at the bottom of the report, in Voss's hand, reads, "No further investigation recommended. Terrain does not permit. Terrain does not permit." It was the closest thing to an official explanation the case ever received. The Halloran Brothers Timber Company filed an insurance claim for the lost equipment. The claim was paid. The company did not send another crew into that section of the ridge country. They did not publicly explain why. Their internal correspondence from November and December of 1893, preserved in the records of the Springfield Chamber of Commerce archives, where Halloran Brothers filed their business papers, contains one relevant document, a letter from the elder Halloran brother Patrick to his company attorney dated November 14, 1893. The letter discusses the insurance settlement and the company's future timber contracts. In the final paragraph, Patrick Halloran wrote, "As regards the Stone County section, we will not go back. I am not a man given to superstition, but I am a man who recognizes when a place has made itself clear." He signed the letter. He did not elaborate. No remains belonging to August Riley or any member of his crew were ever recovered. No personal effects were found outside the camp. In 1894, a trapper working the area reported that the camp itself had vanished. The lean-tos, the equipment frame, the cooking pot, every trace of human occupation, leaving only the fire ring stones and a scorched patch of earth. The scorched patch is mentioned in 2 separate accounts from the 1890s and early 1900s. Both accounts note that it was larger than the original fire ring, much larger, and that the stones of the ring had been rearranged into a shape that neither witness could identify or adequately describe. Today, that section of Stone County Ridge Country is part of the Mark Twain National Forest. Hiking and recreation access to the Ozark Hill Country in that region draws tens of thousands of visitors a year. The limestone bluffs and creek bottoms are considered among the most scenic terrain in Missouri. The specific 4-mile corridor where the 3 incidents occurred between 1879 and 1893 does not appear on any recreational trail map published by the U.S. Forest Service. It is not listed as restricted or closed. There are no signs. The trail access simply ends at the creek crossing, and there is no maintained path on the other side, as though the land beyond that point has been quietly agreed upon as somewhere people do not go. In the Missouri State Archives reading room in Jefferson City, the folder containing Cletus Dunbar's statement, Hardin Voss's final report, and Caleb Marsh's official deposition is accessible to any researcher who requests it. Helen Pruitt's research notes connecting the 3 cases are in the Springfield Greene County Library's local history collection in a box marked simply Ozark Miscellany 19th Century. Very few people have ever asked to see either collection. The last researcher to sign the reading room log for the Voss file did so in March of 2004. The signature is illegible. The stated research purpose is listed as personal. There is no record of what they found. There is no record that they ever came back to return the file. There is a question that sits underneath this entire case, underneath all 3, incidents in that ridge country that no official document has ever directly addressed, and it is not the question most people ask first, which is what happened to the men. The question is this: what kind of place takes people and leaves everything else? A fire, a flood, an act of violence, all of these leave evidence. They leave damage. They leave the marks of force applied to a world that resists. What happened in that Ozark corridor left nothing disturbed, no chaos, no rupture. It left camps that looked as though the men had simply stepped away for a moment and had not yet returned. That is not the signature of disaster. That is the signature of something that did not need to make a mess. Something that had done this before and understood exactly how much force was required and no more. Was that something human? A rival timber crew, a criminal enterprise, a conspiracy that left 9 men dead in a place too remote to search properly? That explanation requires a level of coordination and concealment that no one in 11 days of searching found a single trace of. Or was it the place itself? Not a person, not a group of people, but a section of limestone ridge country in the southern Missouri Ozarks that has, by every available record, been taking people quietly and without evidence since at least 1879? There is no comfortable answer. There is only the choice between two kinds of disturbing. One of them has a human face, the other does not. Of all the cases examined in this channel's archive, this one refuses to settle 9 experienced men, a camp that told no story, a pattern that repeated across 3 decades and was never publicly connected until a researcher working alone 60 years later found the thread and pulled it. Was this the work of men, organized, deliberate, operating in that corridor for reasons that have simply never been covered? Or is there something in that particular stretch of Ozark Ridge country that has its own appetite, its own patience, and its own long history of going unaccounted for? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know where you land on it, human explanation or something older than human. Both sides of this argument are defensible. I've been sitting with these documents long enough to know I cannot make the case for either one with certainty. If the buried records of the American wilderness are where you want to spend your time, the cases the official reports closed without closing, subscribe and ring the bell. There are more files in the archive. None of them are easy. All of them are real. The Ozarks keep their secrets in the limestone, deep and dark and patient. Some of those secrets have been keeping since long before anyone thought to write them down. Until next time, stay on the marked trail.